This is Supply Chain Breakdown, and we are back, and today we are breaking down the hidden cost of manual override. My name is Connor, Communications Director here at Lokad, and to my left, as always, Lokad's founder and a tonic for sore eyes, Johannes Van Morel. First of all, before we get started, comment down below. 1, is manual override a daily part of your planning process? And 2, are there any situations where you think it is appropriate for humans to challenge or override the system? Get your questions in as soon as possible, and I will pose those to Johannes in about 20-25 minutes' time. And with that out of the way, Johannes, good to see you again. The hidden cost of manual override, our first topic of the new year. What is the scope of our criticism today?
The scope of the criticism is that the supply chain game is played wrong. That's pretty much it. And when I say it's played wrong,
New Year, same
by
message.
wrong, I mean those forecast overrides, because we are talking about that specifically. It's not any kind of overrides. Those forecast overrides are directly harming your capacity to play the supply chain game right. And what do I mean by supply chain game? It's fundamentally you convert your precious, dollars or euros into stuff, physical stuff. You transform them, transport them, repackage them, distribute them, and then sell and then you, at the end of the chain, you sell those things, transformed, transported, at a higher price point. And you rotate, you just keep repeating that. That is a supply chain gain, and you want to have it like maximally profitable. That's the game that is being played. And what I'm saying, and the scope of the discussion is really, if you are overwriting a forecast, and I would say anytime you do it, you are literally harming your company. You are doing something that negatively its capacity to play this game profitably. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Well, just a side question here, because again, the topic is manual overrides, and obviously by definition, manual overrides can apply to any tweak to a system. But the thing is, as you said, let's be real, it's almost always not just about forecasts, it's usually demand forecasts, because it's not scrap rates, it's not lead times, it's not pricing, it's not allocation, it's simply demand forecasting tweaks. And I'm just curious, why is it might as well have just been called manual overrides to demand forecasts, but why do they happen, and why are they so common on that very specific issue?
So first, why such a focus? Because in the mainstream supply chain theory, the demand forecast is not just a forecast. It is in fact the foundational layer of the plan. And the plan is both a forecast and a commitment. Those numbers that you put in the future, they are implicitly, you say, this is it. This is the future. And then as soon as you say that, this is not a forecast anymore. This is a commitment. Everybody has to do whatever it takes so that this future becomes real. Thus, the plan in the mainstream supply chain theory is put on a pedestal. It is like the king and central. And thus, fundamentally, overriding that is overriding the plan. And overriding the plans is so important because it overrides the resource allocation that will happen in your company. Thus, who can control the plan can ultimately control how the company allocates its resources. Thus, the temptation to just tweak things endlessly because the downstream effects are so important. That explains why people are so frequently attending that. It doesn't explain why it's actually a perverse sort of practice and why it hurts the company. So I can proceed with that too.
Yes.
So now, why does it hurt the company? Essentially for 2 reasons. The first one is that ultimately the scarcest resource in your company, when supply chain wise, are people who know how to play the supply chain game. That is the bottleneck. That is ultimately, you have a lot of people who can do a lot of mundane stuff, but if you want your supply chain to support your company and to be a profit center, not a cost center, you need people who can play this game profitably. Those people are rare. Those people are scarce. Those are the scarce resources of your company, supply chain wise. Now, whenever they do an override, this is not accretive. They do something, so they spend an hour, and then the next day, the system is just going to regenerate the forecast. So this thing is going to be gone. You see, that fundamentally, it's not accretive, because instead of trying to use those scarce resources, those people who knows how to play the supply chain game right, to do something that would be a lasting value. They just do the correction, and this correction comes with like an expiration date, which is exactly the date of what is corrected in the forecast. You see, if I if I correct manually the forecast for next week, then at the end of next week, my correction is gone. You know, it is like it comes as a perishable thing by design. Thus, it is not creative. That's the first reason.
Okay.
So we have
there's two pillars there.
Yes, two pillars. The first one is again the scarcest resource are the people who can play this supply chain game, and if they do manual overrides, what they are doing is essentially everything that they do is like thrown out of the window and discard, like within a few weeks or a month at most. So it's not accretive. The second thing is, if you the second problem is what about the overrides themselves? What would increase that? It turned out that the evolution of the software technology itself for the planning software really inflate the amount of overrides that you need. Why? Let's go back in the 70s. 70s, your forecasting software is like super basic. It forecasts at the category level, super high, and at the monthly level. So your software is not sophisticated, and thus it produces very few forecasts, and you have very few edits. But keep in mind, the vendor wants to improve the products. So what will they do? They will say, "Oh, our forecast, our tool was so basic in the early 80s, only categories and only monthly buckets. Now we can do weekly buckets and we can do subcategories as well." So you went from a forecast that was like, let's say 500 numbers to 5,000 numbers. And by the way, how does the software vendor makes money? They sell licenses based on seats. So the vendor, planning software vendor, is increasing the sophistication of their forecasting tool. They generate more forecasts, more granular, in time, in hierarchy. And then suddenly, because there is so much more forecast, they need more people to review that and override. And by the way, more people mean more seats.
Yes.
So this is, it was not intentional, but from the software vendor perspective, this is a virtuous cycle. You increase the sophistication of your tool, you can sell it more expensive because it's more sophisticated, but in turn, people need more people to deal with those endless correction because your software is going to regenerate those forecasts. So the amount of people you will need, it's going to be endless. Thus, they need more seats, more revenue for the vendor, more sophisticated, etc., etc., etc. And thus, we have a very, very perverse incentive where, under the guise of we are going to give you more accurate forecast, which is kind of tangentially true. Yes, the forecasts are slightly, but ever so slightly more accurate. Certainly not to the extent that vendor claims. It's more like, the next generation of forecasting tool is like 1% more accurate than the previous one. Vendors will tell you, oh, our new forecast is like 99% more accurate than the previous one. Certainly not. It's incredibly incremental, and we have reached, I would say, a plateau about 15 years ago, a plateau of how good you can get a time series forecast. It has not really been moving much for the last 15 years. So bottom line, anyway, there's still improvement, but it's very small. But what you can do with scalability, with cloud, you can explode the granularity of a forecast. You can do it at the SKU level. You can do it at the SKU level per store, per site, per factory, per everything. So the amount of forecast that your software planning vendor generate explodes. The amount of people that you need to do the correction explode.
Okay.
And vendor make profit. Does the company make profit? No, because the company is spending more resources than ever to do something that will never end, which is just fix an endless stream, self-inflicted amount of forecasts. You see, that's why I say this is where it harms a company. It harms your capacity to play supply chain games. You are not playing the supply chain games right. You are playing the game of the supply chain software vendor.
Okay. Well, when I announced this, thank you. I want to push you back, much like we've been doing in the other series on your book. I do want to push back with some of the information anonymously that I've elicited from having conversations with our audience when I announced this topic. And again, I'm just going to sort of like collate and compile some of it, but I don't want to straw man the other perspective here because again, a lot of people who are listening and who will listen to this will say things like, yeah, okay, we do have a sophisticated system, maybe not as sophisticated the system of intelligence as you, Johannes, have espoused in your book, but we do have a pretty sophisticated model that generates forecasts, and we use that we use that primarily and very sparingly. Overrides are applied where we perceive, you know what, it's lacking that little bit of je ne sais quoi. It's lacking that little bit of market insight or intel that, you know what, only exists in my head, the planner. And those are the rare occasions where I manually intervene. To situations like that, do you still think, well, that adds no value? That's a cost. It's a waste. You shouldn't be doing that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because again,
well, I asked fairly to be.
Think again what the consequences of your action. The consequences is the more correction you do, the more people are involved with the software, the more your software vendor will prepare the situation so that it needs more. You know, it's a vicious it's a virtuous cycle from the software vendor perspective. Yes. It's a vicious cycle from the client company on the receiving end during the supply chain. So you should not play that game. You know, it's a game. It's like going to the casino. You're not going to get rich to the casino. The house always win. That is the sort of things where if you play this game, the only winner will be the software vendor. I can guarantee you that. I've been there, done that, seen my peers doing that for almost 20 years now. The only winner, it's like a casino, the only winner will be the software vendor. So, and you cannot, it's again, thinking that you can beat the vendor at that, it's just like thinking that you can beat the house in a casino. You might be clever, but you're not going to beat the house. You know, maybe occasionally because you're super lucky. But if you're rational and if you think in terms, what are my odds and will I make money on that? No, you won't. You may enjoy the process. You know, it might be like a casino. The process might be very enjoyable. Why? Because the software vendor, they are not fools. They will make it pleasant for their users. You know, they want more seats. To have more seats, the process has to be pleasant and whatnot and whatnot. But so what is the alternative? You see, because the thing is that people would, I think the main objection would be, but Johannes, you cannot leave those forecasts, they're broken as they are. And I agree. And then, so the solution you need to think of a way to correct the tool that generates the forecast in the first place. This is where you should intervene.
Well, it's fixing the disease versus the recurring symptoms.
Yes.
That's the way I think about it.
Those forecasts are produced by a piece of software.
Yes.
You need to fix this piece of software. And yes, and people say, oh, but I'm a practitioner, a supply chain practitioner. I'm no software specialist. I say, yes, but you have a software problems. And guess what? That's also what I say in the book.
Yes.
To a large extent, a modern practice of supply chain is the mastery of the modern way of doing software.
Yes.
And that's just the way it is.
And people already touch forecasts, which are generated using software anyway. So it's a very limited argument, in my opinion.
Exactly. I mean, so the solution, and it's relatively straightforward, is that the software needs to be changed. And now there is another side effect of that. How frequently will you change the software? The answer is all the time.
Yes.
Because because those insights, I do not dispute the fact that supply chain practitioners may have insights that only they have. You see, I'm not disputing that. The U.S. president published something on Truth Social or whatever, and then the madness break loose or whatever.
What?
It can happen. This sort of thing.
Okay,
it can happen. You know, there are things it will not be in the system. You know, it's not possible.
Oh, okay.
It's not possible. You cannot have every single crazy contingencies in your system. Thus, the system, because it's a piece of software, it's not Skynet, it's not like omniscient AI. The system that you have to generate your plan is not omniscient. So it's a piece of software, limited. It doesn't know everything. Fine. So what you want is just a way to be able to intervene in this software. And the software itself need to be designed in a way that the time frame for correction is 1 hour, roughly. End-to-end correction to add a new critical insight because the rule changed, because it was announced online or whatever. The rule changed. Sometimes it can be tragically, a disaster. There is a ship in a port that just blocked the ports and whatnot. Strange things can happen. Tragedies happen, and it can be a massive snowfall that is surprising everybody. Whatever. I agree with those surprises. Yes, they are part of the game. You just need to be able to modify the software, and the software itself should be amenable to such correction within a 1 hour time frame. That's what we're talking about. If you have that, you're good.
Well, again, this is something I wrote down earlier, and it's an important way to frame the discussion because, again, I don't want our position to be strawmanned or misrepresented. You're not necessarily, correct me where I'm wrong, we're not making the argument that there will never be a situation where an experienced practitioner will be, there will never be a position, we're not saying there won't be a time where a supply chain practitioner won't have a valuable insight. What we're saying is that once off? Is that something that reveals a pattern that the system should absorb and then we'll know going forward, so that the machine, the system, won't continuously generate a broken recommendation that you, the genius, must come in every day, every single time and go, that should be a 5, not a 4.
And we end up with a very strange patterns, which is then those insights, they can, for large companies, they come in daily. And so the system is changed daily.
Yes.
And you would say, but how is it different from forecasting for overrides? Because here you're overwriting the system itself instead of overwriting the forecast. I would say, well, the difference is that you have probably like 4 orders of magnitude of difference in the magnitude of what is overwritten. You see, it is, if you override the outputs, it is potentially thousands and thousands of numbers that you need to change. If you override the software, very frequently it's just one meta parameter or just one line of code to say to add a condition, and that is done, and all the software will stay untouched. You see, so you can have something that is extremely complex happening in your market, but the impact of all of that is a judgment call, and you modify one line of code, and you're goodish. When I say goodish, again, approximately right rather than exactly wrong. This is a game being played now in supply chain, and here I say if you displace that from editing the output to edit the numerical recipe itself, you are minimizing the amount of friction by, again, probably about 400 orders of magnitude. And as a plus side, sometimes, not always, but sometimes you realize, damn, this insight is part of a broader pattern I had not thought about, and thus this is not a quick fix that I'm making. I am actually improving for good the numerical recipe because I realize, damn, there is a class of stuff happening in the world. And if my recipe can actually take care of that, and I have now an extreme example that magnify, the thing that I had not understood, I will be playing the supply chain game better. So you see, it's very interesting, and that's why it becomes very accretive. Most of the corrections are not accretive. But I would say, again, that's the experience of Lokad. Maybe 1 out of 10 turn out to be very accretive.
Yes.
And that's, again, we are back in business in the sense of back in business in the scarcest resources are the people who know how to play the supply chain game. And here we are maximally, extracting their most valuable insights to make them permanent in the system.
Well, again, this is to try and convert the system into an asset. Again, you keep using the term accretive.
Exactly.
But to me, I think the one that's
that's
precise. A productive asset is the thing that people, I think, resonates stronger with people. The idea that, no, I want this. I am still applying my override, my insight, my expertise. It's just I'm not doing it in a way where I am holding the hand of the system every single day, and I dedicate my own time and bandwidth every single day to trying to put together a PO. It's no. How can I make this system a better asset so that I have more free time?
Yes.
So again, it's still it's changing it from a routine override to maybe, okay, this is a once-off override, but the compounding effect of applying that to the system is that the asset gets better and better and better because it learns.
Yes.
And again, this is the system of intelligence that we've argued about before.
And it learns, again, no Skynet, it learns how? Because the supply chain practitioner himself is learning.
Yeah.
You see, it's just, again, I'm not going to invoke Gen AI or anything. In what I describe, Lokad has been doing that for 10 years. The system learns because there are smart humans in the process who just learns. And the interesting thing is that, again, it is this alternative approach that I propose is very parsimonious in the way it consumes those people. So those scarcest assets, those people who can play the supply chain game right for your company, it doesn't abuse of them. It preserves them so that they can improve the system itself plus all the other things. Because you see, the thing is that if you want to play the supply chain game right, it's not just about having the right forecast. You need to have good relationship with your suppliers, you need to have good relationship with your clients, you need so many other things. But again, you can only do those other things if you're not in constant firefighting mode against your own forecasting system.
Yes. Well, again, just to provide a little bit more perspective, because I want to push on and dig a little bit deeper, but I do want to provide some outside perspective here and also reference something you've said before. So for the sake of evenness, we're talking about like overrides, people discussing, coming to consensus. ASCM's S&op guidance would suggest that consensus is, quote, a core step of the decision-making process in any successful company, not a failure mode. But in your book, and I know you've said various versions of this, but in your book, you refer to routine manual corrections as signaling a serious design flaw. That's page 330.
Yes.
So my question to you, a very pragmatic one, and one I'm sure people are interested in learning about, is there a practical test for differentiating between overrides that are design flaw based, they've come from a design flaw, and overrides that are, no, this is volatility and I do need to step in?
Again, this is a game that you cannot win. The vendor is acting against you. The casino house, the house of the casino always win. You see, it's a catch-22 situation. You are facing an adversarial situation where your company, no matter how smart you think you are facing a software vendor who has 100 plus clients. And they have played the game so much more than you. You're not going to win this game. You're not. And you see, it is the sort of situation where it's the only way to solve it is to come to accept that there are classes of games that are they are not fair. It's again, we are going back to that. If you start to say there is classes of override that are legit, okay, what will be you will be discussing with your software vendor. Your software vendor will reverse engineer that, and you know what? Within 2 years, this class of acceptable overrides will benefit from sophisticated features, to help you.
To be commoditized.
No, not commoditized. To be magnified in sophistication. You see, because you say, you only care about this subclass of overrides. Let me help you. I will design features to help you. And those features, damn, they are so good. But they introduce complexity. Complexity means suddenly it takes more time because you have things that are more complex, more powerful, but more complex, and thus more people. And we are back into the problem of, the incentive is to sell more seats. So you see, you will not solve this problem. It is not a problem that can be solved. You cannot, you see, it's like expecting someone in the 19th century that was a horse trader to suddenly start advocating for automotives. Not going to happen. It's every single time something comes from the automotive sector, the guy will come up with plenty of good reason to keep you on using your horses. You have like a deadlock, of incentives. And how the situation was unfolded. Well, the people who were doing horse trading mostly went bankrupt. And that's it. So they removed themselves from the market, and that's it. It's unfortunately we have this deadlock of incentives, and due to opacity and a few other things, I believe that this situation has gone very, very bad, specifically in supply chain. It's fine. Don't worry. The market will find its way because the market is not a great educator; it's a great filter. So the market will filter. It will do. And the interesting thing is that the market is an unintelligent filter. It doesn't need people to understand what's going on. It will filter nonetheless, whether people understand or not. That's the beauty of markets.
Okay. Well, I'm going to push on because I think there's from your perspective, I'm sure one of the hidden, or not really all that hidden, it's very explicit costs of manual override is basically keeping people as much as possible in the loop.
Yes.
Now, in your book, you argued that most vendors, not us, but most vendors, quote, deputize users as human co-processors of the system. Now, in response to that, I know, because I've had this discussion a couple of times this week already, IBP and S&op practitioners, no problem with that, they would argue the exact opposite, that, and I'm paraphrasing here, the process, in our experience, can't replace human decision-making, especially for cross-functional trade-offs that just aren't evident in the data or process. So is there any, I know you're already saying no, but is there any merit to that position before you
Again,
address
the
this?
only way to assess the merit is to step back, because you see
Okay.
here we have conflict of interest. Because obviously, if you're part of the s&op team, you have a vivid interest in the preservation of the s&op process. So we need to step back and think, okay, we are in the 19th century. That's our analogy for now. Companies need horses to operate, so they buy horses. So that means that inside the company, there is a mini department and horses are very expensive. And by the way, it's a little bit a horrifying statistics, but in 19th century, the life expectancy of a horse that was used to work, for a mine or something, was about 4 years. So horses were dying all the time. Very interesting. Historians claim that, for example, 19th century New York was smelling like a dead horse, because there were so many horses that were dead all the time on the streets that the entire city smelled like dead horses. Okay, back to the anecdote. You have this vendor who is selling horses. You are a large company, so you have actually an entire division of people who are expert in getting good prices and good horses from the vendors. That's their specialty. And guess what? Do you think that someone who inside the company has been, for his entire life, being an expert in, getting the best horse at the best price, is going to be super enthusiastic about the idea of transitioning toward cars? No. So you see, you have the problem is, I would say, so my answer to that is, if the opinion of people who are conflicted should be disregarded. And you need to step back and make your own mind. And that applies, for example, for Lokad, what I'm saying. I am a vendor. I'm trying to sell my stuff.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is that you cannot trust what I'm saying. I have my own incentives. So
be skeptical about what we're saying.
Exactly.
Maximal skepticism.
Maximal skepticism. You have to assume that I am maximally biased. And then because we are dealing with evolving technologies and whatnot, the general advice is pick analog situation in history, because this meta game of a new technology enter, it disrupts and whatnot, it happens hundreds of times. Yes, it's what I'm saying is like a mini battle in a gigantic war of progress, where you had people that were company-wise that were kicked out and replaced by better technologies. This thing has been played literally for 200 years, and there has been dozens and dozens. And the interesting thing, if you study history, I suggest to the audience to study a little bit history, is that the patterns are always the same. It's always the same. And I love Douglas Adams. Is
Hitchhiker's Guide, right?
Yes, fiction writer, incredible writer. I really recommend this Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He has such an incredible quote. He says, if you actually discover a new technology before your age is before 25, for you it's not new. It has always been part of the world. It is just the world as it is. If you discover this new technology between 25 and 35, he says, this is an incredibly exciting development that captures your interest. And then if the technology emerge after the age of 25, he says, this is heretical and this technology should be banned. And that's the free stage of the human development with regard to new technologies and new stuff. It is hilarious, and it is so true. It is so true. It's like an instinctive, visceral reactions. And there was also Niels Bohr that was saying that science progresses only one funeral at a time. It's a little bit more morbid, but it's exactly the same idea.
Well, another point, again, implicit in the question, which again, it's a sort of a composite from comments that I've received from the audience building up to this discussion. Excuse me, the idea that, well, the system can't handle, or like human judgment surpasses the system that we currently have. And it's like, okay, that might be true in this specific context, but the context needs to be evaluated just a little bit. For example, if you're talking about a company that has more than, I don't know, a few hundred million turnover to $1 billion per year, their IT budget's going to be quite expansive. They can't afford the kind of systems of intelligence and technology that we're talking about. So again, it's like if you're spending, I don't know, hundreds of millions on your ERP, you can afford the kind of technological intervention that we're talking about today.
Yes.
So again, every situation is
yes,
unique.
but also the thing is that it is actually quite cheap. You see,
well, that's the other part.
That's also the sort of thing that is maddening, is that because in terms of paradigm, those companies are stuck with, I would say, ideas that had, I would say, a time of validity that ended in the early 2000s. You know, the validity of those ideas, it used to be valid. I would say, you know, this paradigm of manual overrides, I think was valid from probably 1975 to 1995. That was, I would say, for those 20 years, I would say, yes, computers were crappy, languages and compilers were crappy. There were so many crappy things, and the capacity was so limited. People, humans, had a genuine advantage in just, you know, touch the numbers and be done with it. So that was, I would say, the time period for which this of validity for this approach. It is expired. I think it expires in 1995. It became absolute nonsense by 2005, and by 2015 it was crazy. So that, you see, it's again, is it crazy to use a horse in 1910? Not yet. Cars are still crappy, unreliable, etc. Is it crazy to use a horse in 1920? Cars start to be quite good. So at this time, it starts to be a little bit insane. Is it crazy to use a horse in 1950? Yes, absolutely. The cars of 1950 are absolutely better than horses in every single dimension that you can imagine. There is no way back. So you see, it's the craziness or the damage to your company increase as time passes.
I think you can, just to stitch together a point, it's from a discussion we already had on chapter 2, chapter 2 history of the book. We were talking about vendors, the fetish for buzzwords and whatnot. I do want to point out that there has been obviously an aggressive campaign to convince people that, you know, you need to keep these two. You need to keep horses. In this analogy that you're using, like
again,
so the skepticism has been missing, is what I would say.
Yes. I mean, again, we are talking of worldwide, you know, a dozen vendors that are in the $1 billion annual revenue that are lobbying like crazy this whole industry. So. I mean, just Lokad is just like a very, very small, you know, guy, and we are doing what we can on YouTube and LinkedIn, but we don't have our own trade shows. We don't have like massive events. We are very, very, very small, and I'm just saying that don't expect the incumbents, the people who are deadlocked in an outdated technology, to ever see the light and propose the alternative. By the way, again, look at the history. For example, for digital photography and Kodak, they internally quasi-invented digital photography. They literally had reports, fairly accurate reports, with literally like a 15 years runway to say digital photography is coming. We need to transition everything because this thing will win eventually. And they even got like a decade and a half ahead the correct timeline. So not only they knew, but it's usually knowing that something is coming is relatively easy. To know exactly the timeline, much harder. But Kodak, they knew it was coming, and they had a very, very good guess estimate of the timeline, and yet they failed to react. You see, this is again, if you're an incumbent and you're dominant in a certain market, certain way of things, disrupting yourself, most companies failed. Most companies failed. That's just the way it is. I hope for Lokad we will manage, but you know, we have to be reasonable. Most companies fail.
Again, there's some comments from the audience, and I do want to come back to. There's a concluding question I want to get to, but it ties it together nicely, so I'll save that. But I do want to touch on the idea of accountability, because that is, again, having these conversations with people, one of the things they'll say, even if they, because look, let's be honest, a lot of our audience kind of already agrees, but I don't want to just preach the converted, I do want to push. One of the things they will say is, even if all of that's true, we accept that there's maybe a cost of inefficiency, like having people pay for the same decision twice, whatever. But we have accountability. So, for example, if I have a PO, the forecast is generated, it says order 200, Joannis comes in and says, that should be 2,000. At least when I'm stuck with, I don't know, 1,500 extra units or whatever, I know who to blame. Joannis is accountable for that decision.
Yes, and this,
but in the system of intelligence that you're advocating, where you take people out of the loop, where's the accountability? Where's the audit trail? Who's responsible for good or bad decisions?
So, again, history, this game has already been played. So let's have a look at a situation where it has already been played. Late 60s, actually. The first business systems emerged, IBM. And you know what? They can do accounting. And they have processors to do arithmetic. They can do addition. They can do multiplication. And guess what? Those systems have bugs. So something that nowadays we don't even we have forgotten because computers are so good. Computers never make any mistake for arithmetic. I mean, in fact, in reality, they do, but with a probability that is so low, we don't care. So essentially, we take for granted that we have absolute godlike perfection machines as far basic arithmetic is concerned. That's a modern computer. It can do. That's our basic expectation. It can do basic arithmetic perfectly. But what about in the 60s? It was not yet the case. Computers at the time had problems, bugs, and sometimes, bugs like the multiplication is wrong. Now the question was, the accountant at the time was asking the same question. I am doing the accounting for the company. I am responsible to make sure that, everything, this double entry system is done right. You want to say that who is going to be accountable for arithmetic mistake? The accountant himself was responsible for arithmetic mistake. And it was his value to say, I am the accountant, I guarantee that the calculations are right. And now you want me to say that this company, how is it called? Intel or something? IBM or something?
Computers?
Computers, machine, I don't know. They are going to take this responsibility. What if our accounting, and by the way, it was a real concern, is wrong? Are we going to blame IBM? Well, guess what? Yes, that's exactly what unfolded. People said, long story short, the accountant decided, okay, I'm going to trust that the basic arithmetics are going to be done right. And you know what? I'm going to sue the hell out of IBM if it's not the case. And guess what? IBM got their machines quite right and problem solved. So fast forward here, what we're saying is that it's not that there is no accountability. It's just that the accountability is different. Yes. The vendor is responsible for essentially the integrity of this programmatic system.
Yes.
That's what Lokad does.
The system of intelligence.
Yes, it is responsible for its integrity, but there is a supply chain scientist, potentially with the help of the client, who are responsibility for the integrity of the numerical recipe. So you see, fundamentally, the numbers are still, there is still very much at Lokad. That's why we say the supply chain scientist is a person, and every single one of our client has supply chain scientist attached to them, is personally responsible for the quality of the result. And what is the purpose of Lokad? The purpose of Lokad is to provide all the support that every single supply chain scientist need at Lokad to be able to bear this responsibility. So you see, yes, the supply chain scientist is ultimately taking the entire responsibility, but it is the responsibility of the company, Lokad, to make this responsibility as manageable as possible. So it's like, it is not like you are on your own, and if you fail, it's all on you. No, it's the company is responsible. A little bit, think of it like airplane pilots.
Yes.
The pilot is fully responsible to making sure that passengers arrive, alive
That's
at destination. But at the same time, the aircraft manufacturer is fully responsible
for the integrity of
the airplane and making sure that this plane is as good as it can ever be made for the pilot. You see, it's a co-responsibility, and yes, it's
there's limits to the responsibility.
Yes, there is limits, but at least clearly there is a lot of technology involved, but there is a lot of responsibility involved. It's not like technology without accountability. There is accountability at every stage. Lokad is the same.
Yeah. Again, just to echo that slightly, and excuse me, the idea that because we are talking about Lokad there, the idea that using the technology, at least our system of intelligence, it will differ depending on who you go with. But just for the sake of that discussion, the responsibility for the integrity of the algorithm, the plane in that analogy, rests with Lokad or with the supply chain scientist.
Yes.
The maintenance, the repair, etc. Okay.
So but for example, we have a co-responsibility, because what if the supply chain practitioners miss a very important insight? See, we are not specialists of every single business that we serve. So ultimately,
it's a relationship with the client, of course.
So ultimately, where the client bears his own responsibility is that what we want is to be incredibly diligent,
Yes.
reliable executor of their insights.
Yes.
But fundamentally, if someone is doing like a very specialized market like wind turbine for Canada in this region and whatnot, it's very tons of specificities. We are not expert in that, and there is a change of regulation about one of the province of Canada that we didn't know about.
Yeah.
I mean,
Saskatchewan or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a responsibility of the client to tell us, the vendor, by the way, beware. We have this thing that is coming. You need to do something. We think it is impacting for your
and that's that's improving the asset. That's what we're talking about.
So you see, the Lokad is responsible, but if critical, semi-hidden business insights are never communicated to the vendor, I mean, again, we don't pretend to the client that we are going to become even better expert of your own business than you already are. Again, the scarcest resource comes back to the supply chain practitioner who knows. That's why this person is so important.
And that comes then full circle. We're going to go on to the audience questions now, but that comes full circle to the point that was made right at the start, which is that we're not making the argument that there don't exist core insights in the heads of practitioners. So again, when we say humans in the loop currently is bad, what we mean is humans in the loop as the loop currently is not what we would advocate. Simply, if the loop equals asset that you're trying to improve on a daily basis such that tomorrow you don't have to correct the mistakes of today, we're all on the same page on that. Yes. If it is, no, we're going to have a system where you have to babysit it every single day.
Yes.
We have to have consensus on every single line every single day or anything like that, then no, that's where we differ.
And again, just think of it a little bit, another analogy. Think of it as the Toyota approach. You produce cars, and you have cars that comes out of your factory with defects. So what do? Step one, you just have a crew that is there ready to fix the defect. So you give the car to the client, they drive 20 kilometers, there is a defect, they come back, and you have a crew ready on standby to fix the defect in 1 hour. That's one way. Do you think that is the way Toyota would do it? Absolutely not. They think if a car after 20 kilometers has to come back, we need to fix the freaking factory so that it doesn't produce cars that have defects that force people to come back after 20 kilometers. You see, it is the same sort of thinking. You need to have the deeper fix. The deeper fix, fixing the numerical recipe, it's a deep fix as opposed to the manual override, which is a quick fix. The manual override is the exact same thing, analog to Toyota, who has teams on standby at the exit entrance, at the exit of the factory, just to get the vehicles back after 20 kilometers because they face an issue. That's why I say it's madness. That's why I said the correct way is no, you have to fix the factory, the thing that produced the forecast in the first place. That's what needs thinking and fixing.
All right, well, thank you. I'll push on now, some comments and questions. So this is from Antonio. Hello, Antonio. Comment followed by question. I agree that manual overrides will be gone by the next cycle of forecasting, i.e. next week you were talking about what you do today will expire, the life cycle. However, repeated manual overrides could suggest a disconnect between business and leadership expectations, perhaps tied to long-term financial gains and the best estimated demand. In some cases, the best demand forecast might even be at odds with the narrative pushed top-down. In situations like this, how can supply chain analysts like us bridge the disconnect?
You need a method that make the disconnect obvious for everybody. That's it. You see, you cannot, because here what you're saying is that what if my CEO is wrong and he push things that are just nonsense? It's a polite way to just say that. You're not going to win a battle, an argument with your CEO. So forget about that. The only thing that you can do is essentially to have, again, that's the way you engineer the thing. Say to tell your CEO, to tell everybody, those are core assumptions. Cost of money, for example, the interest rate when the banks lend us money, the lead times that we observe, the this that we observe, that. It's just, facts. And now I can tell you that my system is just a machine that takes the facts and generates the decisions. If you don't like the decisions, we disagree on the facts. The good news is facts are not opinion. Facts exist independently from your opinion, the opinion of CEO, and the CEO would say, yes, let's get the facts right. You know, if we have, in fact, we have a disagreement because, in fact, the CEO say, but your interest rate is wrong. It's wrong. I say, okay, let's double check. Let's call the CFO and see who is right, who is wrong. But you see, you need to objectivize the system so that people can play this game rationally without having, you know, perverse incentives all over the place. Thus, that means that you need to have essentially machines that is what Lokad engineer, that is facts in, decision out. And yes, there is an element of subjectivity in the facts, because what count as a fact or not needs, you know, you need to think for that. It's not a given. There is nothing in our universe that is like objectively a fact, immutable, and something that is objectively, you know, not a fact. The boundary between fact and non-fact is, I would say, obviously there are things that are very easy, you know, very, very, very easy. But there are cases where it's difficult, where the boundary is fuzzy, especially business-wise, you know, what counts exactly as a fact. It can be a little bit. So the only thing that you have to say here in this sort of situation is with the CEO is that, you know, we need just to clarify this boundary of what counts as a fact and what do not. And then we are back to the accountant who says to the CEO, those are the books that the machine compute based on our accounting rules. I don't make the rules. If you dislike the fact that the company is losing money, don't blame the messenger. I'm just, you know, as an accountant, I am just a messenger of that. It is obvious to a CEO that he cannot blame the accountant for the losses of the company. And, you know, if we upgrade the way the supply chain game is played, those gaps and disconnect will be vastly reduced. Just like nowadays, there are very, very little battles between the CEO and accounting because they disagree on the numbers. You know, it's, again, modern accounting systems are sufficiently good and reliable so that there is not, it's not a political battle. The books are just what they are. It's not really up to debate.
Okay. So DMs come through, and there were also some saved questions that I do want to pose. I'll ask this one quickly because you kind of already touched on it, but I just want to read it because it is verbatim and it is interesting. Quote, this is someone who works in retail. Quote, in our office, we have people who will say, just change it. Sometimes it's a planner, sometimes it's a manager, sometimes it's sales themselves. When they get it wrong, and they often do, at least we know who is to blame. How does Lokad's system handle accountability? You already touched on that, but a terse version of the previous question.
Again, it's exactly the same way. A supply chain, a numerical recipe is attached to a supply chain scientist. This person has a name. We know who engineered the recipe. If the recipe is scrapped only once a year, you know, once a year there is a few glitches, you would say, we can live with that. You know, it's quite good overall. If this thing is glitching and crashing every day, and it works for other clients, then maybe there is a problem with the supply chain scientist. You see, again, the accountability is just the same. Lokad is not, you see, that's the mental paradigm. People are wrong. It is not a Skynet. What I'm proposing is not a Skynet transition. It is not about having a freaking autonomous AI that is accountable to no one to run your supply chain. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying
it's good to say that that's not what you're saying. Though.
It's not what I'm saying.
That's the impression people sometimes get, I think.
And they misunderstand. And by the way, our peers are all too happy to reframe what we're saying as if Lokad was pushing for that. This is not. On the contrary, we are pushing for something where there is very clear accountability. Very clear. And I would argue that in a classic supply chain setup, the accountability of endgame decisions is completely diffused. And same thing with forecast. The problem with this collaborative forecast is that everybody is touching the forecast. So at the end, you have like maximal confusion on who is accountable for what. I very much disagree. The status quo is completely horrible in terms of standards of accountability. This is not a strength of the present day system or mainstream, you know, supply chain theory. It's one of its main weaknesses.
Okay. Excuse me. I'm going to push on. This is a question from friend of the channel, Boris. Good to see you. Just a few parts to this, but I'll just take it section by section. So, first, Johannes, do you think there is a visibility or legitimacy threshold for economic decision engines and supply chain systems of intelligence? after which traditional planning software starts to lose credibility at scale. So like a certain amount of big companies start using these things, therefore everyone sort of jumps on the bandwagon.
Again, it will happen. You know, that's the sort of things. I said,
enough people start using cars, when will people get off horses?
About, it's what I said about, remember Kodak. I say, not only they could see the future, they could see the timeline, right? Which is incredibly hard. Usually, it is not difficult to see that a certain future will happen as a little bit inevitable. And a lot of people get it, but the genius is to get the timing right. For example, Steve Jobs with the iPhone, he not only got the future right, he got the iPhone exactly at the right point in time. I can go into the details. Some key technologies, he had that in the back of his mind for quite a few years. And he, in fact, if you read the story of Steve Jobs, it's very interesting. He had some key technologies and he waited just the right time so the technology would be there and it would snap and it would be a success. So again, the problem with this question is that what you're asking fundamentally is supply chain are going to transition, and I know it, that's my intimate conviction, to this new model. Why? Because banks already do it. It's like the ancient trading system versus quantitative trading. And that's even it's even why I called this approach, Lokad, quantitative supply chain. It was an analogy with quantitative tradings in banks. It will happen. It's for me, it's just a certainty. I see, and the interesting thing is that every year I see more and more companies who, on themselves, without Lokad inputs, reinvent exactly what Lokad has invented. So you see, it is not like Lokad is just like incredible geniuses, impossible to reproduce. No. Some people think completely on their own. They have never heard of Lokad. They just go through the intellectual journey, the same as Lokad, and they reinvent exactly what Lokad has invented. It's a little bit scary for me as a vendor, but it's also very exhilarating because it means that it's an idea where its time has come. More and more people, even if they have never heard of Lokad, they just reinvent the exact same thing. So at some point, the amount of people in the world who will just reinvent, whether they have heard of Lokad or not, they will reinvent the same principle, came to the same conclusion, and act accordingly. It will indeed, it will reach a threshold where, bam, the world transition. That's very frequently like that for technologies. When will it be? I don't know. I'm just trying to accelerate the process. That's why I'm spreading those books. I don't know, but please trust me. I'm doing whatever I can, the very best.
That's why we're here, actually. You're seeing it in action.
We are trying to accelerate, to speedrun this transition. That's what we are trying to achieve. And by the way, there is the term, if you take chemistry, is percolation. What we're trying is to have this theory percolate the supply chain community. The audience can look it up. It's exactly the right physical analogy for what we're trying to achieve.
It's also how coffee is made. That's the verb for to percolate coffee, a percolator. Excuse me. Some more practical questions. Literally has practical in the. So again, this one, DM. Okay, it's very short. Okay, Johannes, practically colon. Where do companies usually see the first payoff when they cut down on overrides? It's an interesting question, actually, because it's like saying where do you see not waste? Where does not wasting money show up?
Again, when you have a switch of paradigms, it is unfortunately not the right question to ask, because you are looking at this through the wrong angles, through the wrong lenses. You're looking at the problem from the old paradigm angles. So first is to accept that you have a change of paradigms. Again, let's revisit horses and cars. We are in 1910. Roads are terrible. So horses are the winning solution because many roads are so impossibly crappy that the cars of the day, which are not, the sort of modern Land Rovers that we have, the cars of the day struggle immensely on those crappy roads. So it is not an obvious win, what they're saying. But suddenly, if you start embracing cars, there is so many things that you can do more efficiently. So I would say the benefits are extremely vast, but they are also extremely diffuse. And most of the benefits comes from things that you would maybe not expect at first, such as what you gain with this new way, for example, Lokad, is just that you can refresh your forecast every day completely and up to the decisions, so that you have decisions that are always completely up to date.
Yes. At scale.
At scale.
At scale.
And even if your forecasting model has not improved by at all, so it's the same forecasting model. You know, it's not a forecasting. Lokad doesn't pretend that we have a way to see the future better than anybody. No, but at least we are more up to date. And instead of having like a lag, because you see the problem of the game played with forecast, overwrite, and whatnot, is that you add delays.
Yes.
You had weeks and weeks and weeks of delays. So and remember, no matter your forecasting technology, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you do it. The further you have to forecast far into the future, the more inaccurate you are. You see, it's the iron law of forecasting. Forecasting tomorrow is much easier than forecasting next year, and it's much easier than forecasting a decade from now. You see, if you are further into the future, it becomes like exponentially more difficult to forecast. So whatever you can do to reduce the dependency on long-term forecast will be a net win. You see, and again, that's technology, that's independent of the technology. And what I'm saying is that Lokad, one of the key unlock is just refresh every single day. And you get a boost that is much bigger than what you would get by a marginally more accurate forecast.
There was a quick follow-up to that, which is, I'll be honest, our lead times are pretty much always wrong. Suppliers miss dates.
Yeah. Yes.
How much of that can you handle?
All of it.
Okay.
Again,
I don't want this to turn into an infomercial. I'm literally reading what's on the screen, just for the record.
You again.
That's the contract.
The problem, you have the wrong paradigm. You are thinking, I'm going to get a forecast and I'm going to get it right. This is not the way Lokad operates. We have a probabilistic mindset. We say, oof, we don't know about the future. It's just irreducible, the uncertainty. So the future demand, very fuzzy, very uncertain. Future lead times, very fuzzy, very uncertain. But uncertainty doesn't mean lack of information. For example, you tell me our suppliers are so erratic.
Yes.
Yes, but what are we talking about? If we talk of, for example, getting a new airplane, Airbus has a 7-year backlog. So we are talking of a 7 years lead time.
Yes. Minimum,
yes. If we are talking about fresh food, people say, oh, it's so erratic. You realize the strawberries, sometimes they don't deliver the next day. And sometimes it's 2 days. You realize for strawberries? Okay. So there is uncertainty, yes, but we are not even in the same universe. You know, in one way, a big uncertainty is tomorrow or the next day. That's strawberry universe. The other way is maybe if we are lucky, it's going to be 7 years. And if we're not lucky, it's going to be 9 years. You see, yes, you have uncertainty, but still, it's not exactly, you still know something about the future. The fact that the future is very uncertain doesn't mean that it's completely uncertain. Another example, will the price of oil go negative? People had the mistaken assumption that it could never go negative. It can go negative, but people like Nassim Taleb correctly predicted that it would not stay negative for long. So he correctly predicted that yes, it could go negative, and he correctly predicted that it would not stay indefinitely negative. So you see, so you know stuff that is structural about the market, and you know that oil can sometimes, in very strange situation, it did happen in the past, end up having a negative price on the market. But you also know that oil is fairly valuable, that oil is consumed, and that the world is not going to operate for any sizable duration of time with negative oil prices. So you know that if it happens, it will be a fringe event and not like a lasting condition of the market. And the fact that you know that, again, there is uncertainty, but it's not like you know nothing. And that's exactly what Lokad leverage is, that there is tons of uncertainty, but uncertainty doesn't mean lack of knowledge. It just means imperfect knowledge, and we need to have a system that works with imperfect knowledge. That's it.
Thank you. I'm just responding to those messages. Hope that worked. All right. Last thought here. Well, this one actually is quite terse. And then I have my closing question, which is, again, it's from Boris. Excuse me. Assuming that adoption for the kind of technology that we're discussing is still in an early stage in supply chain, which it is, how long do you expect it will take to move from early adopters to broad mainstream usage across the industry? Predict, Johannes. You're smart with that.
That's a tricky question because it's again a question of timeline. That again we are back to the sort of question of timeline, and that's the essence of you. It's fairly. I mean, a lot of people manage to see the future right, but will they get the timeline? The timeline is know when to start and how fast the transition will happen. Again, my take is that it will probably be a slow transitions for some verticals, but from others it will happen super fast. So I think there is this quote that says the future is already there, it's not evenly distributed. So here I think we have companies that operate in essentially with monopoly protections. It's France is a specialist. We have 57% of the economy that is managed by the French state. Those companies face no competitive pressure whatsoever. So they literally can take 2 decades to upgrade anything. They're fine. The market pressure doesn't apply on them. So and by the way, India had the same sort of nonsense. A lot of countries have this sort of nonsense. So can we expect? And here I would just to give one anecdote. It was from the General de Gaulle. He discovered in a review, and I think it was like in the 60s, that the French army was still keeping cats. And why did they had cats? It was because they actually in Azincourt. It had a battle that happened like 600 years ago. In Azincourt, we lost against the British because, in part, there was many reasons, but in part, one of the many reasons was rats had eaten the strings of the bows. And so the army decided that it was a necessity to keep cats around so that the rats would not eat the strings of the bows. Fast forward, we are at the second half of the 20th century. And the General de Gaulle just realized that the French army still has cats around, despite the fact that since essentially the Napoleonic Wars, we have been fighting with muskets. And so these things were like 200 years obsolete, but they were still there. Whatever. So you see, I would say the transition will take a long time. I think historians will laugh at the fact that some industries were like 200 years late to the party. Just like, the General de Gaulle discovering that we have like, in French, it was maître chat. We had the cat master. Okay. But so I think we will have, some hilarious, some situations that will be hilariously bad. I know that in India, some very backward administration were still using typewriters like 5 years ago. I just read it again, that's anecdotes. So it will be slow, but that doesn't mean that it will not be like super fast for some verticals. Which verticals? I would say probably e-commerce, very fast. Retail, very fast. Probably like domains like aviation, oil and gas, people who have like a very strong engineering mindset, because they will get it, they will act on it, and the market is very competitive. And then the second wave will probably be people who are a little bit more protected from the technology, but who are full of very smart people. So that will be, for example, luxury. You see, luxury is not like super tech dependent, but luxury is full because it pays very well.
Yes.
Luxury is full of very smart people. So I do not expect that
I've been talking to some of them this week, yes.
Yeah, they will not be on the front line, but they will be just behind because they have very smart people in general, because they pay very nicely. And those people will react quickly, even if they don't have, I would say, an immediate competitive pressure. You see, because if you're selling champagne, you're not threatened by OpenAI. Champagne will be sold with or without. But if you're selling champagne, turn out that your margins are very nice, and so you can afford to have very smart people. And those very smart people, they will do smart things in general. So that's
the advantages are still there, but the pressures to pursue those advantages are not necessarily the same. Okay.
Exactly. And then you will go on and on through the markets, with probably essentially with the state-run monopolies at the very end of the queue that will upgrade 200 years from now, when people has even forgotten that what was the point of having those forecasts overwriting practices in place. Just like the General de Gaulle wasn't even readily aware of why his own army had cats. It was like a mystery. Explain to me why we even keep cats. And a lot of people didn't even knew why they were still keeping cats. You had to resort to an historian to get this answer.
All right. Well, we've covered history.
Yes.
We've also been talking for almost 70 minutes, and it's been lovely. It's good to be back.
Yes.
What I will say is to draw things to a close and as for your concluding thought, and to reference something you said before, because I want to make this very practical for people, because again, it's hidden cost of manual override. And there was a comment you made, I think it was last week, in one of your posts on LinkedIn, and you talked about the question you asked the audience was, where are you paying for the same decision twice? And when it comes to overrides, I really like that phrase, where are you paying for the same decision twice? And for me, that's a really nice way to conceptualize the hidden cost of overrides. Ultimately, you're paying for the same decision, the same action that you take, at least twice. If you have 10 people overriding, it's more than twice, in fact. So it scales with every touch point.
And again, the pain is rising exponentially. For now, the cost is basically the cost of not doing that is just like the cost of not using horses. In 1910, for some reason, everything is not like fully ready for cars. So the cost of not using cars is kind of bearable because your competitors using cars, they still face those crappy roads. They still face those crappy cars. But every day that passes, the gap magnifies.
Yeah.
And then very quickly, it reaches a point where the gap is so large, you can't even recover. And then your company has disappeared. And that's what happened. So what I'm saying is that this is a situation where the costs start low, but increase fast. How fast, I'm not exactly sure. But what I can say is that at the moment where the world will start transitioning, the company who haven't made this transition will most likely go bankrupt. And it's very obvious. It's just like you can resist not using computers, for example, in your company, just stick to typewriters. But there is a point in time where if you resist too long introducing computers because you want to be stuck with typewriters, there was a point in time where the market sanctioned you by bankruptcy. And it happened again and again and again. It's, again, market are filters. Remember that if there is one thing that the audience must remember, the market never educates, the market filter. And it does that without any coordination, without people being even aware of what is happening. The market filters irrespectively of the will and intent of the participant. It's beautiful, a little bit scary as an entrepreneur, For me, it's a little bit scary, but this is like free market at play.
All right. Well, Johannes, thank you very much. We're out of questions. We're definitely out of time, as always. Thank you very much for joining me. Good to have you back in the studio. And to you, thank you all for attending, for registering, for your questions, for the conversations that we had in anticipation of this discussion. It's always good to get some perspective from the audience so that I can filter it through to Johannes. And you know what I'm going to say. If you want to continue the conversation, reach out to Johannes and me on LinkedIn. You're already here. You can see our names. Click on them. Connect with us. We're always happy to talk. And with that, we'll see you next time for Breakdown. Please do get back to work.